Let's start with you introducing yourself, whatever you'd like to say. You don't have to say anything that you don't feel comfortable saying. And then ask away.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Natalia, Agnes, and I'm a student in George Mason University. I'm a freshman, and I'm a government and international politics major.
Awesome. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So yeah, I call this interview, basically I'm doing a speech on crisis management, and I read like your write-up about it. So I was going to interview to get some information to put in my speech, basically.
Awesome. Ask away.
Okay, so exactly what is crisis management if you were to describe it?
Crisis management is, and now I'm going to give you my definition, all right?
Yeah.
It is, and a crisis management professional as well. So I'm going to start there. Crisis management is the act of managing a crisis. Now, I'm going to add to that and say that the goal of crisis management is to firstly prevent the preventable. So I say that when you're crisis ready, you have less risk of having crises in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, if you can't prevent the preventable, so if you can't prevent everything. So if the unpreventable happens, then crisis management, the objective of successful crisis management is managing an incident, a negative event, in a way that fosters increased trust and credibility in the brand is the ultimate objective. So that means that there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen, both in terms of actions and communications, to right wrongs, to get to the bottom of the incident and understand what happened, what went wrong, why did it happen, and to take measures to put people first and manage the incident so you suffer the least amount of damage to the brand, its reputation, its bottom line, its stakeholders, the environment. And then if you want to go above and beyond that, it's if you can come out of that with even more trust and credibility, then that's kind of the the aspiration, what you're striving to do.
I'm sorry, do you mind repeating that? Put people first and manage the situation in a way that
what did I say?
both parties, like the individual, comes out of the situation as
well. Manage the incident in a way that you want to protect. You want to protect people. You want to protect the environment. You want to protect the business. You want to protect the organization's reputation, and ultimately, doing all of that protects the organization's bottom line. So basically, crisis management is something bad happens, and you manage it in a way where you suffer the least amount of damage to the brand and to people.
Sorry, I'm writing that down.
That's okay. I can send you the recording of this.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So basically, what goes wrong, or what are certain things that people do wrong in a crisis situation?
Typically, some common mistakes that I see is, well, a couple things. Common mistakes, not putting people first. So one of my crisis ready rules is people above process and bottom line always. When you do that, you have more opportunity to manage the crisis effectively, and then process and bottom line benefit as a result. So not putting people first is a major mistake. Another major mistake is taking too long to communicate, because in this day and age, things can spiral out of control, and other people have so much opportunity to take control over the narrative of the story of the incident in so many different ways, and with such impact. So the longer you take to communicate effectively in a crisis, the more control you lose over the narrative, the more trust and credibility you risk losing, and the more crisis response penalty as a result you risk suffering.
Okay, third question is, what does someone have to do to become a crisis manager? What are steps you should take to do that if you want to potentially do that as a career in the future?
There's a couple things. So I actually have a great article. I'll send you a link that talks about that. Gain as much experience as you can in both kind of the theoretical, so like read as much as you can. My book Crisis Ready is a great place to start, and also, I mean, free resources on melissaagnes.com give you so much information. And then going, there's some really great courses out there that help, so in university courses, and gain as much practical experience as you can before you are tasked with the responsibility and the risk of directly managing a crisis for an organization, or being responsible for that. And then the other thing that I would say is that not everybody, this type of career is not for everybody. So if you have a brain, so I have met in my life 2 people that, other than myself, only 2 people that see the world similarly to me. And I would say that those 2 people are phenomenal, above and beyond anybody else I've ever met in this role. And so there's certain qualities in a human that lead to or lend to being really, really good at this job. And for the most part, from what I've gathered in terms of collecting data and observations, these 3 people, myself included, is that we see risk everywhere, and our brain goes to this, like, it's not just we see risk because we look and say, if that were to fall, then that would happen. And like, it's not necessarily like that, but it's seeing risk and then seeing the risk of the risk and then the opportunity through the mitigation. So there's this innate aptitude that, and then there's different qualities, like remaining calm under pressure. If you are somebody who gets stressed out when pressure is high, this is probably not the best job for you. So education, experience, and a natural aptitude, natural qualities that will lend to you loving the work for all of the right reasons.
I remember when I started like looking into crisis management, I was like confused, like what's the difference between like a crisis manager and a lawyer. So I don't know if you would be able to like clarify on that.
Okay, cool. So a lawyer looks at the law, right? A lawyer is legally trained, and lawyers need to be a big part, not the sole part, not the leading part, but a big part of a crisis management team for an organization, because they see risk through a different lens that is very material and very important and very impactful. Crisis manager, such as myself, looks at the bigger scope of the risk. Legal risk is one part. Reputational risk is another part. Operational risk is another part. Business continuity is another part. So what my job is to look at the entirety of the problem or the potential problem, and look at all of those different angles and pull the right people together so that all angles are covered and the most strategic, holistic strategy is executed upon. Legal is a very important role in that, but it's not it's one piece of the bigger puzzle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I don't know if you mind me asking, but what did you study in college?
I don't mind you asking. I didn't go to college. Well, I mean, I did go to college, but I didn't actually graduate. Life took me a different route. So this is kind of because I said education, it can be self-education. And not just that, but when I was in college, this wasn't a thing. This wasn't something that was taught. Now I teach it, and my model is adopted into course curriculum around the world. But at the time, it wasn't really a thing yet. And life took me a different route. So I am very much self-educated and experience-based.
Amazing. Thanks for answering.
Not that I fully, I recommend it. I recommend people, a lot of people need school and the structure of school, and that's the best route. And then other people don't. So I really don't think it's great.
So what are like the first steps you take if like a client comes to you like with a problem? Like what are the first steps you take in managing a crisis?
Actually, I had one today. So, understanding. No matter what, whether I'm helping an organization manage an actual crisis or whether I'm helping them develop and implement their crisis ready program, so prior to crisis striking, uh, it's about collecting data. You need to have information in order to make an informed strategic plan, right? Plan of action, strategy moving forward. So the very first thing that I do is I collect the data. And that's everything from what happened, why did it happen, who are your stakeholders, what do they expect, what's the relationship, how do you communicate regularly, data on the organization. So like just Googling them and looking at what their current kind of reputation is. And so just the more informed that I am, the better I am in a position to give meaningful advice.
And like after that, you just advise them on the situation and steps to take.
Yes, in collaboration with their team.
What if someone's not like unwilling to take your advice
That
or
happens.
steps?
That happens. That it's happened a few times, and I couldn't serve that client. I couldn't serve that organization, and therefore had to, if I can't serve, I can't serve. But the way that I mitigate that risk is all of my branding, all of my positioning is about becoming crisis ready, because it's very, very scary to be a leader of an organization. You love this organization. This is your livelihood. This is your professional reputation. And now you're faced with a crisis. And the right course of action is not necessarily the least scary course of action. So it's very difficult if you don't have a relationship with me where you understand and you trust where I'm coming from and where I'm going and where I'm going to take you. It can be very scary and very overwhelming. And so I've always positioned myself as being as helping organizations become crisis ready. Two reasons. One, I say, and I'm going to knock on wood because it's not always possible, but for the most part, I say my clients don't have crises because they're crisis ready. So being crisis ready enables you to prevent the most amount of preventable risk. You can't prevent all risk, but the most amount of preventable risk. And then when and if they do experience a crisis or a viral issue, we have a strong relationship where they know me, they trust me, and I've trained them, so they're ready for it in this beautiful, beautiful way. Whereas if you call me in a crisis, I will do my best to serve you, but sometimes you get in your own way due to emotion, and that's completely normal and understandable. It's just not my recommendation to find yourself in that position.
Okay. And what are certain steps you can take to be like crisis ready?
There is a model called the crisis ready model, and there's 5 steps that then become this cyclical culture. And so the first step is auditing the mindset and culture of the organization. So basically looking at how does the organization see negative events? What's the lens through which their people are trained and empowered to see negative events? How do you respond? Basically, where do you currently sit on the spectrum of crisis readiness? The second piece is to educate. And education in this regard means bringing especially leadership to a baseline, a common baseline understanding of the different impacts and variables that are inevitable in times of crisis. So you want them to have a baseline education understanding of what they can expect, what they need to know, what the challenges, the opportunities, the different things, right? So baseline understanding of that. The third phase is the identify phase. And that is where I collect the data. So it's identifying high risk scenarios. So most likely high impact types of issues and crises that the organization is most prone to. Understanding stakeholders, doing stakeholder mapping and understanding who the stakeholders are, what they expect of the brand, how communication is communicated between the brand and those stakeholders on a regular basis, and just collecting as much data. I said earlier that it's about information, collecting all of that data. The way that I see it is designing a crisis ready program is like taking major jigsaw puzzle of like, say 2,500 pieces, and the pieces are like tiny, 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 and opening that box and throwing that open box into the wind in the forest. Your job is to collect the data, is all of those pieces. So in this identify phase, you're seeking to collect all of those pieces. And then in the fourth phase, it's about designing the program. So that's from the governance structure to action plans and communication strategies and handbooks. So basically, you've collected all of those pieces and now you're putting them all together. And then the fifth phase is, so crisis management can no longer be about having a plan stagnant that sits on a shelf. Instead, it needs to be cultural. In order to be able to identify, assess, and respond to a rising risk in real time effectively in a way that actually fosters increased trust and credibility in the brand, which is the ultimate goal, remember? Then it can't be about relying on a plan. It needs to be cultural. It needs to be instinctive across the entire organization. So that fifth phase is the implement phase. And that's when you go through exercises and simulations and drills and all of these really wonderful exercises that enable your team to cultivate skill sets and also test the program so that you can find kinks and you can strengthen it before you actually take the crisis. So this is kind of like the crisis ready model. It's part of my book, is like this pyramid with these 5 stages. And then once you reach the top, it's about it becoming cyclical, because crisis readiness needs to be cultural. So it's this constant cycle of audit, understand, identify, design, or strengthen the design of, and implement.
Okay, my last question is, I don't know if you've watched Scandal.
Yes, I have.
Okay, so what is your view about that as a crisis manager?
Ooh, that's interesting. It's very Hollywood. That's what it is. It was, I mean, these Hollywood shows and productions, they tend to, they don't always, but they tend to hire consultants or people in the field as consultants for the show. So they did that. Her name is Judy Smith. And so they use that. However, I will say this, it's very Hollywood, and it's very reactive versus proactive. And it's also, one of the things that I observed in it was it was very kind of, it didn't bring in realities from today, like when things blow up on social media, or so it showed me that while I'm sure they received amazing consultations and advice for the show, it missed that element of reality in today's world. But that is me being very critical on a Hollywood production, right? Like, it's a brilliant show, it's great, it's entertaining. I kind of fault it in the sense of, I have a common frustration right now, which is that so many people want to be in this profession because of the glamour that shows like Scandal and viral issues and crises have. It's thrilling, right? It looks so exciting and it looks so fun. And that's presenting risk to organizations, because it's easy to say I'm a crisis management professional or expert and not actually be one. There's no standards or certification around this profession. So that's a personal professional grievance that I have, that I am trying to work towards helping fix.
Thank you so much. That's all I have.
Those were great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the interview, and it was very informative.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you for such smart questions. And if you have any follow-up questions, let me know. And good luck on your. It's a presentation you're doing?
Yeah, it's a presentation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah.
Take care, Natalia.
Bye.